devotees for Krishna's service, and they will engage it nicely because that's what they do. That's their specialty. And if you can't even do that, then just try to accumulate knowledge. Because by knowledge you will eventually come to the conclusion that Krishna is everything. I was going to say Vasudev Sarvamiti. That he is everything. And therefore, our duty is to serve him. And if you can't do that, well, he basically says, just be cool. Just try to be self-situated, he says. Self-situated means that I get my pleasure from within myself. Atma Ram. I don't try to get pleasure from exploiting this material world or other people, but I look within myself and I find the Atma. And when I meditate on myself, when I meditate on pure consciousness, then I feel automatically joy. Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma Nasochiti Nakangshati. That when we are in this state of Brahma Bhuta, Brahma means pure spirit, pure consciousness, soul, the living entity. And Bhuta means the state of existence. So when we're in that state of consciousness where we know, I am a spirit soul, I'm not this body, and I exist actually in the spiritual world, not this material world. This is just temporary. And then I follow the rules and regulations of society, Vedic society, according to the scriptures, and like that. And I don't do any harmful activities, I don't do any sinful activities. Then at least that's something, you know. It's the beginning of spiritual life. But when we look into most religions in the world, actually this is the end of their path. So our path of devotional service begins from the conclusion of other religious and spiritual paths. We're saying, first of all, understand that you are consciousness. Second chapter, Bhagavad-gītā. Krishna says, never was there a time when you or I or all these kings did not exist, nor in the future shall we ever cease to be. And then he goes on to describe the immortal soul and all that. And we've preached on that for years together. Just that one or two verses you can analyze and study for years. And you'll eventually come to the conclusion that you are a being of pure consciousness. And that really consciousness is the only thing that really exists. Because even if we are aware of things in this material world through the senses, we don't directly contact them, but we are simply conscious of their reflection in our consciousness. If we are unconscious, if somebody slips us a Mickey, you know, and knocks us out, then that's New York slang, by the way. And slip a Mickey. So they put something in your drink and you pass out. So if somebody does this and then you're unconscious, oh, they can rob you, they can do whatever they want. And you don't even know it's happening. Why? Because your consciousness is not connected with the body. Actually, the consciousness is eternal. Consciousness is always on. But sometimes it's directed towards an object and sometimes it's not. And that's the difference between waking and sleeping. When we're awake, so-called awake, the mind and senses are the objects of the consciousness. When we're dreaming, we detach the consciousness from the senses and we're simply aware of the mind. We can even dream while we're awake, daydreaming and like that, imagination, fantasy. And then when we're in deep sleep, Sushupta, this is called, that means the mind is detached from the senses and from the mind. I'm sorry, the consciousness is detached from the senses and the mind. But we're still conscious. But because we're not conscious of anything, time seems to pass like that. There's no way to be aware of the passage of time without change. And if our consciousness is not hooked up to any objects, we can't be aware of any change, and so we can't be aware of time. Time seems to pass in a moment. And then there's the fourth state, turiya, where the soul or the consciousness is directed towards itself, toward consciousness itself. When you are conscious of consciousness, at that stage, then the real consciousness begins. Real life begins. Because this is the real situation. Everything that we're aware of, everything that we experience in our consciousness. We're actually not directly in touch with this material world. But when we touch something, for example, the nerves are stimulated, and then the impulses go to the brain, and the brain decodes them into some kind of picture or some kind of sensory experience like that. And so we're actually only aware of those impulses in the brain. We're not really directly aware of the physical world. This is a very strange situation because we think, I am here in the material world. Why do we think like that? Let's say we're dreaming. Then where are we? Can't say. Somewhere in the mind. And then what if we are Krishna conscious and we're conscious of the spiritual world? Then where are we? We're in the spiritual world. You see? So where we are, or where we think we are, is simply a function of our point of view, of what is the object of our consciousness. I've spoken about this many times. That when you have two people in a court, and they're fighting, and they're describing the same situation, the same incident. Well, one person will describe it in one way, and the other person will describe it a completely different way. The same incident. So how is that possible? They both had the same thing happen, the same experience, but because the point of view is different, then each one's version is different. So similarly, when we change our point of view, our whole experience changes. Even if nothing changes physically, simply by changing point of view, then how we experience it will change. The result will change. And I often use the example because it was such a striking experience for me, that the two people standing next to each other in a temple, looking at the deities. And one is having this wonderful religious experience, and the other one is like, Really, I've seen this. Standing right next to each other, in the same place, the same thing, and having a completely different experience. Because point of view. Point of view has to do with meaning. See, the person who's having an intense spiritual experience in the temple is seeing the meaning very differently than the other person is seeing no meaning or less meaning. When we value something, we say, oh, this really means a lot to me. See, so when we value something, when we put a high value on something, it means it has a lot of meaning for us. And if we put low value, we say, oh, this is meaningless. It has no meaning. So what meaning and value are very, very much interrelated. So for most people, they have no knowledge of consciousness. They have no knowledge of spirit soul. They have no knowledge of God to speak of. Maybe very superficial knowledge. And so how much meaning can spiritual life have for them? Not much. Even though they're actually having spiritual experiences, even though they're actually, at every moment, they're in touch with God, because they don't know this, they don't value it. And they throw these experiences in the trash can of the mind. I was reading one Buddhist meditator guy. He's saying most people throw 90% of their experience in the trash can of their mind. They don't even experience their own experience. And because of this, they say, oh, life is boring, life is meaningless, life is dull. If only they would look at their own experience and see what's going on in front of their own eye, then their life would become very interesting. Like, I'm never bored. On the plane, I was coming from Chile, a long plane trip. I was just sitting there. And the stewardess is going, don't you want headphones? Don't you want to watch the movie? And I'm going, no, I'm fine.